that it does deserve. I'm glad that the government is recognising this, and I'd urge you to do all we can, at the OPW to do all they can to resolve the matter and provide an update to the House on it. Thank you, Last Concorder.
Thank you, Deputy. Minister Alex White to reply.
Thank you, Cahirley. And I'd like to, I'm taking this debate as indicated by Deputy Matthew on behalf of my colleague, Minister of State Hayes, who has an urgent commitment. And I want to thank Deputy Donoghue for raising this issue and affording us an opportunity to revisit this matter, since he himself raised it. I know others have, but I'm aware that Deputy Donoghue raised it previously in autumn of 2012. And I want to assure the Deputy and the House, firstly, that the impact that flooding has on businesses and indeed on householders, and the issue generally of flood insurance cover, remain very much to the fore on Minister Hayes' agenda. The difficulties some people have been experiencing in securing insurance cover for flood risk at affordable prices, or indeed at all in some instances, especially in areas that have had flood defence works carried out, is something that the Minister is actively pursuing. To look at the flooding issue in overview for a moment, Cahirley, the strategic focus of the Government, through the work of the Office of Public Works and the local authorities, is to alleviate the impact of flooding through the provision of defences to reduce existing flood risk, and by taking steps to manage and reduce flood risk in the future through a strategic and sustainable approach under the National Catchment Flood Risk Assessment and Management, or the CFRAM programme. This comprehensive programme to identify and assess flood risk nationally will in time provide a level of information which will allow much more informed engagement with the insurance industry in respect of flood risk cover, and in turn will enable the insurance industry to take decisions on the provision of cover based on the fullest possible assessment of that risk. Looking further forward, the CFRAM studies will lead to the provision of integrated flood risk management plans, which will assist the management and mitigation of flood risk well into the future. Prior to the completion of the CFRAM programme, Minister Hayes had been concerned to ensure that the insurance companies make their assessment of risk in any particular case based on the best available data. In particular, the Minister has stated on many occasions that he does not accept that any property protected by significant public capital investment would not be able to receive a quote for insurance at reasonable cost, the point referred to by Deputy Donoghue in his introduction. Accordingly, following a number of meetings he had with the Insurance Industry Federation and a number of the main insurance companies, a joint working group has been established between the OPW, the Irish Insurance Federation, and representatives of several insurance companies to progress agreement on a sustainable format and system to facilitate the exchange of information available at present on completed flood defence schemes. This will ensure that the insurance industry can be fully informed as to the extent of OPW investment in flood protection measures over recent decades, and will take that investment fully into account in assessing flood risk for insurance purposes. A preliminary exchange of information between the OPW and the IIF has taken place on selected completed flood defence schemes and the standard of protection that they provide. Clearly, it is important that the information be as thorough as possible to verify the level of protection that's involved. This requires a considerable amount of detailed work on the part of the OPW to collate the required data and present it in an acceptable format. Minister Hayes is happy to say that the feedback received from the insurance industry on the, as it were, the template information provided has been positive. Some relatively minor technical issues remain to be resolved, but the Minister is optimistic that the template format will be agreed shortly. Minister Hayes acknowledges the commitment of the Irish Insurance Federation to making substantial progress through this working group, which is already engaged in this matter in a very cooperative manner. The working group will be meeting regularly to advance and complete its work in the quickest possible time frame. The Minister is hopeful that an agreed system of information exchange will greatly improve the situation over time. It is important to bear in mind that the provision of new flood cover or the renewal of existing flood cover is ultimately a commercial matter for insurance companies, as acknowledged by the Deputy. The insurance companies cannot be directed to provide flood cover to specific individuals or businesses. It remains a matter for the insurance market to manage the assessment of risk and the provision of all classes of insurance cover at an individual policy level. This assessment takes account of a range of factors and is often considered on a case-by-case basis. There are, however, avenues available to those who continue to have difficulty with flood insurance cover. I'm informed of Cathaoirleach that queries or complaints in this regard can be directed through the IIF's own free insurance information service. In addition, the Financial Services Ombudsman deals independently, as deputies will know, with unresolved complaints from consumers about their individual dealings with all financial service providers.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Donoghue.
Much last Count Corla. Minister White, thank you for providing that information to me. I want to welcome the fact that it is clear that progress has taken place since the issue was last raised in the House by me, in terms of the way in which information could be shared being progressed and hopefully resolved soon. The areas that are important to me is that we do ensure that we end up with a process that allows the infrastructure that the state is providing to be taken into account by companies who are making a decision as to whether they want to insure somebody or not. And as I see the money that local authorities are investing into dealing with this issue, I'm gravely concerned that that is not happening. And I want to thank the Office of Public Works for the seriousness with which they are taking this. I want to see it progressed, and I'll be raising it in the House again in the near future. And I would say that while it is a decision as to whether an insurance company wants to offer any kind of cover or not, that's their decision. Perhaps what we could look at is a system in which they might decide that they are going to provide an area which could be of risk with cover, but they might take that into greater account in the magnitude of the premium that they're charging to people, as opposed to not providing any insurance at all. Because the stark reality that many of my constituents are facing is they can't get any cover at all on their homes now, despite the fact that there is the infrastructure in place to prevent flooding, or that there will be such work in place in the near future. Thank you, Lascan.
Thank you. Tara.
That makes the case very well, particularly with regard to his point as to the necessity to have a process by which where public infrastructure funded by the state should be, in a sense, factored into the question of the provision of cover by insurance companies. And I think the Deputy makes the point, as I say, extremely well. The Minister has made considerable progress in relation to it, has found a lot of cooperation in respect of the work that he's doing, the OPW are doing. And I note the Deputy's intention, which I'm sure will be carried through in his usual way, that he'll follow this matter up in the future and keep the matter here and make sure that it's followed up in this House and by the OPW. And I know the Minister takes a great interest in this also.
Thank you, Minister. And the next item is in the name of Deputy Michael McNamara to the Minister for Health, the necessity of HICWA standards, which are problematic for some elderly care facilities. The Deputy has 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Minister, I wish to bring to your attention, if it is indeed necessary to do so, statutory instrument 236 of 2009, which provides for minimum standards for healthcare. First of all, I suppose it goes without saying that the standards contained in this statutory instrument are greatly to be welcomed and indeed are greatly desirable. The standard with regard to accommodation which is contained in it is that the premises shall not use premises for the purposes of a designated centre unless the premises are suitable for the purposes of achieving the aims and objectives set out in the Statement of Purpose. The Statement of Purpose contains at paragraph 10 that the register provider shall ensure that residents are provided with privacy insofar as it is reasonably practicable to the extent that the resident is able to undertake personal activities in private. Minister, as no doubt you are aware, HICWA was tasked with developing national standards to extrapolate from that much more detailed national standards. But from that statement, which nobody could take any issue with, indeed, that all elderly people in care facilities, both public and private across our country should have sufficient privacy and dignity to perform whatever functions are required. The HICWA extrapolated from that existing bedrooms which are currently shared have at least 7.4 metres per resident. Within 6 years of implementation of these standards, there are to be no more than 2 residents per room, except in high dependency rooms, which shall have up to 6 highly dependent residents. Now, Minister, I have to say that since getting elected, I have spent some time visiting the state facilities for community care across Clare. Indeed, there are 3: Raheen Hospital, Stella Maris and Innistimon. I spent a lot of time in St. Joseph's Hospital in Ennis for personal reasons. I would greatly like to take this opportunity to express my thanks to the staff of St. Joseph's for the excellent standard of care which they provide. That standard of care was indeed vindicated, and I'm glad to say that it was vindicated by a very recent HICWA investigation into St. Joseph's at the end of last year. An inspection was carried out on the 27th and 28th of November. However, the fact that St. Joseph's, like the great majority of such facilities across the country, is a relatively old establishment, it was found, unsurprisingly, that it didn't comply with the standard of only 2 residents per room. Now, while I was there, I obviously took the opportunity to discuss this with residents, and indeed a very close relative of mine who was there likewise discussed with her fellow residents. And it seems to me that there isn't unanimity among the residents of such facilities that they would like to be in single rooms, or indeed rooms of 2 people. In many instances, I think people prefer to be in larger rooms. Now, that is not to say that the standards should be lowered in any way. That is not to say that they don't want their privacy to be respected. Of course they do. But to extrapolate from respecting privacy to putting people in single and double rooms, exclusively in single double rooms, seems to me to be questionable. And I would question whether it is feasible, because it has been acknowledged by the HSE that there will be great difficulties in bringing St. Joseph's into line with the requirement of single and double rooms. It's been acknowledged in Kilrush that there will be difficulties in bringing the facility there. Likewise, Raheen, to a slightly lesser extent in Innistimon. But I'm just speaking about Clare, but I'm sure that this is mirrored right across the country. Now, Minister, I don't for a moment wish to appear to be advocating a lower standard for residents in such institutions. Not at all. But I just wondered the extent to which their views have been canvassed and their opinions sought when it was determined that it was in their best interests to be in single rooms. Because many people would love to get out of private facilities where they have single rooms and to get into public facilities where they share rooms, where they have companionship. Be they regardless of the reasons that they're in these facilities. A second issue, Minister, which I'd like to take the opportunity to bring to your attention is the way these inspections are carried out, and this relates to a facility which is actually not in my constituency, it's in the constituency of the Lascaux Corla, but St Anne's in Woodford, which is very much on the Clare-Galway border, had an inspection in the 19th of October 2011, which was a follow-up inspection, which was, by and large, you'd have to say, very unfavourable. But the issue of fire hazard wasn't raised at all. A couple of weeks later, in February 2012, there was a further inspection, and the facility was closed within 24 hours. Now, I don't really understand how there could be no issue with fire in October 2011, and suddenly the facility is to be closed within 24 hours, which created a huge difficulty for many elderly residents who had to be moved into, some of whom had spent very long periods of time there and had to be moved at very, very short notice, which created huge turmoil for themselves and, of course, for their families. And the issue is that nobody from HICWA was prepared to meet with any of these relatives to explain how that came about. There seems to be no redress. Thank you for your time.
Ampara.
Thank you very much, Hurley, and I'd like to thank Deputy McNamara for raising this issue and for his insights and observations in relation to it. If I might just make some general remarks at the outset. As the House will be aware, the overarching policy of the Government is to support older people to live in dignity and independence in their own homes and communities for as long as possible, and to support access to quality long-term residential care where this is appropriate. If it becomes necessary for an older person to move to a nursing home, their safety and well-being is of paramount concern. We have to ensure that the highest standards of care are provided to all residents in a safe and secure environment, and that we meet the needs of those who require these services in the very best way possible. The Health Information and Quality Authority, or HIQA, is the independent body responsible for promoting quality and safety in the provision of health and personal social services for the benefit of service users. On the 1st of July 2009, statutory responsibility for inspecting and registering nursing homes was given to HIQA's Chief Inspector of Social Services. This is underpinned by a comprehensive quality framework comprising the Health Act 2007, care and welfare regulations, and the national quality standards for residential care settings for older people in Ireland. It is important to have effective mechanisms, I'm sure we'll all agree, to maintain and enhance public confidence in the delivery of quality residential care. Residents, their families and the public need to be reassured that the care people receive is monitored. The Health Act 2007 provides this with a regime designed to protect the public through an independent inspection and registration system for residential services. I believe clearly that patient safety and quality assurance in nursing homes is best secured by setting quality standards, reinforced by regulations that specify how the best services possible can be delivered in an effective and appropriate manner. The national quality standards that the Deputy refers to are an essential component in ensuring the quality and safety of residential care for our older population. There are 32 standards under 7 groupings. Those groupings are rights, protection, health and social needs, quality of life, staffing, the care environment, and governance and management. They're patient-centred, providing a blueprint for the provision of a higher standard of care delivered against a set of clear and comprehensive criteria. In summary, the standards promote health, well-being and quality of life, and our older people are entitled to their effective implementation and monitoring, and for effective steps to be taken if they are not met. All nursing homes for older people, whether public, private or voluntary, are subject to the same core standards in relation to quality and safety. HIQA carry out inspections, as the Deputy has mentioned, across the nursing home sector to ensure that these standards are being met and that residents are receiving the best possible care. I think we'd all agree that lessons had to be learned from some very unsatisfactory and well-publicised incidents in nursing homes over the last few years, and from reports such as that of the Lees Cross Commission of Investigation. Our system of regulation and inspection was established for the sole purpose of ensuring safety and quality of care for nursing home residents. While standards of care are thankfully generally very good, we cannot and must not be complacent when it comes to the protection of our older people. And the Deputy raises an issue, I suppose, a query in relation to one of the criteria, or one of the areas, one of the categories of requirements in respect of nursing homes. And he raises an interesting point, particularly the question that he asked with regard to the extent to which there was consultation, for example, with older people themselves in respect of these standards, because we can really only operate, and I know the Deputy would agree with me on this, we can really only operate on the basis of standards that are put together in a rational way. So they can't be nursing home specific or area specific. They have got to be national standards in order for them to be understood and for them to be properly monitored. And I can tell the Deputy that as he knows, the current standards were approved in 2009. They were developed by a working group which was chaired by HIQA, which importantly comprised the regulator, service providers of private, voluntary and HSE, older people's advocacy groups, people involved in the care and treatment of older people, and the department itself. So there was that important, and I agree with him, very necessary input on behalf of persons who are directly affected, particularly people who and we are all familiar with the very active and effective, indeed, advocacy groups for older people that operate in our country. And I want to reassure the Deputy and the House that such groups who are well engaged in this issue were in fact consulted, and it's important that they should be. But there's no harm in the issue that there being continuing debate on these issues. But I want to reassure the Deputy and the House that it is something that was taken carefully into account when the standards were being put in place. Thank
you, Minister. Deputy McNamara.
I'd like to thank Minister White for his reply. There wasn't a word in his reply or a sentence in his reply with which I could possibly disagree. I mean, we all agree that we want to have the highest possible standards of care across our health system, for everybody in our health system, but especially for our elderly who contributed to this state, who built this state up, who frequently created excellent facilities from what were workhouses. across Clare and turn them into care facilities which any country can be proud, and the standard of care which is provided there is second to none. I mean, it's frequently, dare I say, anecdotally, I can say, and I realise that the Minister isn't particularly interested in anecdotal evidence, but it's frequently better in public facilities than it is in private, hence the huge queue that there is to get in. But I would say that the patient-centred standards, I wonder if one were to take a survey of patients in care, whether they would want to be in single rooms or whether they would prefer to be in rooms of 4 people, 5 people, even 6 people. I just wonder, it's a query, and I wonder when these standards run out, as their time period rather runs out, when they inevitably will, whether a survey to that on that issue will be done, and a detailed survey, because it is something that I wonder, based on, and I accept it's just my own observations, it's entirely anecdotal, it's not statistical, it's not rational, it doesn't meet any of the tests, but from what I've seen, I think a lot of people would prefer to be in communal rooms. The other thing with regard to independence, and it's very important that we have an independent body, but it's also important that an independent body is not beyond reproach, or certainly not beyond accountability. And efforts to get in contact by family members of patients moved from St Anne's with HICWA were singularly unsuccessful. Now, I don't blame HICWA for that, because they feel that to safeguard their independence, they can't engage in a dialogue. But there has to be some mechanism by which people can feel, if they feel aggrieved, if they feel that there's a discrepancy between 2 reports. And there is indeed a discrepancy between the reports. There has to be some way that that can be addressed. And finally, with regard to inspections, of course they're important, but inspections, I think, have to be carried out uniformly. And there isn't at least a uniformity apparent to me with regard to these 2 reports. But I do appreciate that I'm bringing up these specifics to the Minister for the first time. And that HICWA is independent, so there's very little the Minister can do. But I would urge HICWA maybe to look at the uniformity of their inspections, and also to look at how they deal with relatives of patients who are unhappy with the results of the inspections, even if it was carried out in the very best interest of the patients. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Deputy. Tara.
Conclusion, I obviously can't, the Deputy wouldn't expect me to comment or refer really to any of the individual inspections that he has pointed to here. But I want to repeat again that the comment and observation in relation to how the particular standards play out, as it were, in particular nursing homes. I take the point that the Deputy makes. I mean, it's not always clear, I suppose, when you see a particular situation on a human level, that the standards, it may not always be immediately clear to us if we walk into, for example, a nursing home or somewhere, that the standards perhaps, are wholly appropriate when we view a particular human situation. But I think that we can be sure and be reassured that the standards didn't come from nowhere, that the standards were in fact put together on a rational basis, that they do make sense, that people were consulted in relation to them, and that finally nothing is set in stone. And I've taken careful note of what the Deputy says, and I'm sure that there is a mechanism, I don't have it immediately to hand, but I'm sure there is, that review is contemplated in all of these kinds of standards, and it may well be that in the future the kind of insights that the Deputy raises here could be taken into account then. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And we now move on to questions to the Minister for Defence. There's a maximum of 30 minutes for priority questions, 6 minutes each, made up of 2 for the Minister's initial reply and 4 minutes overall for supplementaries. Question number 1, in the name of Deputy Sean O'Farrell. Minister.
I was surrounded by multiple glasses of water that I was inevitably going to send flying at some point. Now,
question number 1.
Yes. Remuneration for the Permanent Defence Force in 2012 amounted to €459.76 million. This consisted of €424.76 million on pay and €35 million on allowances. An additional €3.5 million in remuneration for the Reserve Defence Force was also spent in 2012. As the Deputy is aware, talks on an extension to the Public Service Agreement 2010-2014 began last month, with a view to achieving savings in the order of €1 billion from the Public Service Pay and Pensions Bill in the period to the end of 2015 to underpin the necessary fiscal consolidation. During these talks, the Minister for Public Expenditure and Reform, Mr Brendan Howland TD, set out a requirement of savings from each sector in the period to end 2015, with savings of €35 million being sought from the defence sector. This equates to 3.5%, which is the defence sector's proportion of the total public service pay bill for 2013. The Government is committed to seeking agreement with staff representatives on the measures to be introduced to achieve the necessary savings in the Public Service Pay and Pensions Bill. Discussions have commenced, facilitated by the Labour Relations Commission and led by officials of the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform, between public service management and staff representatives on a new agreement on measures to be introduced to achieve the necessary savings in the Public Service Pay and Pensions Bill. In parallel with central discussions to identify those savings which would apply across all sectors, Defence Sector Management and the Defence Forces Representative Associations continue to discuss how additional measures could help to deliver savings and productivity gains to contribute to the defence sector's proportion of savings to the €1 billion target. As these discussions are still ongoing, the Deputy, I'm sure, would appreciate that the specifics are confidential to the parties involved, and it would be inappropriate for me to comment further on this matter.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy O'Farrell.
Thank you, Cairlic, and thanks to the Minister for his response. And of course, we're conscious of the priority government has in this area of the review of Croke Park, and we're, I suppose, conscious of the need to continue to achieve savings across the whole area of the public service. But I suppose in tabling this particular question, Minister, I'm asking you, I think, to be an advocate for the members of the Defence Forces. I'm asking you to recognise that the Defence Forces has been to a very large extent a pioneer in the area of public service reform. You yourself have achieved very significant reform in a very short time frame. I'm conscious of the fact that between 1997 and 2007, for example, expenditure on the Defence Forces went down by, how much was it? About 50% as a share of the national income. I'm also conscious, as I'm sure you are yourself, that the allowances paid to Defence Force members are for the most part part of core pay and therefore must be protected. And I would put it to you, are you conscious yourself in the work you're doing in this particular area that a significant number of members of the Defence Forces are in fact in receipt of family income supplement? And that very fact indicates that the pay of these serving men and women, of whom this state are rightly proud, is at a level that cannot bear further reduction. And I suppose my critical question, Minister, is this. Notwithstanding the needs to achieve savings, are you willing to be a personal advocate for the members of the Defence Forces in this particular issue?
Thank you. And Tara.
Let me give the Deputy every assurance that I have great respect for the fantastic achievements within both the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces in modernisation, in effecting change, in effecting substantial cost savings, which are evident right across the board and which have been achieved in recent years. Indeed, I think the Department of Defence is a model for public service reform that could well be replicated in other departments. I think a great deal has been achieved. There's been, in the short time I've been Minister, less than 2 years, we've had the reorganisation of the Defence Forces going from a 3 to 2 battalion structure. We have had the closure of Army Barracks, which happily we've dealt with now and will not be revisiting. There was 4 Army Barracks closed. We now have the reorganisation of the Reserve Defence Forces. We've had substantial efficiencies affected by all of the events that have happened in implementation. And we've also had the very beneficial decision made many years ago, which has applied, which facilitates when the Defence Forces sell property owned by them, that can be reinvested in providing proper resources. So if I could say to the Deputy, I'm very conscious of this. I'm very conscious of the reality that some members of the Defence Forces are resorting to supplementary welfare allowance to supplement their finances. And of course, it is important that we acknowledge that basic line pay and military service allowance constitute core pay in the Defence Forces. Discussions around what other allowances might be considered to be part of core pay is a matter for discussion between the Department and representative associations for the Defence Forces. But I think it's important to understand the term allowances in the defence sector covers a variety of payment types that are different from each other. Some are intended to reimburse expenses and do not actually form part of remuneration at all. Some payments are made in recognition of particular technical or professional qualifications, while other allowances recognise particularly onerous duties, whether at home or overseas, and fall outside the norms taken into account in setting basic pay, while also reflecting the fact the Defence Forces do not receive overtime. I want to assure the I want to assure the Deputy that I'm very conscious of this, that in the context of the public finances and the savings to be achieved, it is important that we engage, that we look constructively at savings that may be affected, and I very much welcome the constructive engagement that the representative bodies are are participating in. But one very key decision that was made was that the strength of the Defence Forces will be maintained at 9,500. It was a decision that I had government make. The government made at my request in the lead-in to the 2012 budget, the November 2011 period. That was designed to ensure that we maintain the strength. Maintaining the strength leads to certain consequences, which is we have to have the funding available to meet the basic and core pay that arise. But nevertheless, I do think it's important that we constantly look at where savings can be affected. There's a remit from DEPA, the Department of Public Service and Reform, to engage. There's a constructive engagement taking place, and I don't want, as I said, to say any more about that, but I hope that we will, in the context of that engagement, be able to identify savings that can be implemented and applied without in any way undermining the effectiveness or the strength of the Defence Forces.
We've actually, very quickly, because we've run out.
No, I want to welcome the Minister's response because it is somewhat positive, but can we take it, Minister, that you would accept that a rather crude pro rata percentage cut across the board of 3.5%, which has been spoken of and alluded to in your own response, is not the way to approach particular circumstances of the 9,500 members of the Defence Forces?
And a mini answer, please, Minister.
The matter has been approached in a particular manner in the context of departments being requested to achieve certain savings, and the outcome of the discussions with regard to the individual departments and the direct negotiations that DEPA themselves are engaged in, obviously we must await that.
Thank you, Minister. We move now to question number 2. In the name of Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin. Minister.
In relation to the total amount allocated to the Reserve Defence Force each year from 2005 to 2012, I propose to circulate with the official report a tabular statement setting out the information requested. With regard to the future of the Reserve Defence Force, the Deputy will be aware that a major reorganisation is currently underway. This reorganisation is a key element of the response to the findings and recommendations of a value for money review of the Reserve Defence Force, which was published in November last. The reorganisation is based on joint proposals from the Chief of Staff and the Secretary-General of my department, which I accepted. The value for money report found that the current reserve organisation was not fit for purpose and required radical reform. Significant issues such as low uptake of training and a high turnover of personnel, combined with a low strength level, served to adversely impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of the reserve. The review highlighted a range of issues that needed to be addressed in order to improve the effectiveness of the reserve. A new single force concept will see PDF units having reserve components rather than a parallel reserve as at present. Reserve units within barracks will be supported by their parent PDF unit, and the 16 units outside of PDF installations will be supported by dedicated full-time Permanent Defence Force personnel. This concept offers significant potential advantages in terms of training and development of the reserve. The initiatives of locating reserve offices within the Defence Forces management structure will likewise underpin the future reserve. The reorganisation of the reserve is in response to a compelling case for reform. It will dovetail with the significant changes that are occurring in the PDF organisational structure. They will ensure better reserve and enhance overarching defence capabilities. The high-level group with responsibility for implementing the reorganisation of the Permanent Defence Force is now implementing the reorganisation of the RDF. The contribution and commitment of all members of the Reserve is appreciated, and I sincerely hope that all members of the Reserve will continue to serve within the new organisation. I want to ensure the Deputy that there is no intention of winding down the Reserve.
Thank you, Minister. Deputy, there's 4 minutes for supplementary questions and answers.
Okay, thanks, Chairperson. Minister, I have my hands actually on some of the figures. I hadn't realised we'd submitted a written PQ not so long ago in relation to this. And I see here in the response that it reached a peak in funding in 2006. There was an allocation here of just over €13 million under the Defence Forces vote, the section which is dedicated purely to the Reserve Defence Forces, and that has now dropped to, in the latest figures I have for 2011, to 4.386 million. So you can see there that it has almost a third of what it would have been back in 2006, and I think those figures just don't lie. It is clear that there has been, sadly, an incremental erosion of the role of the Reserve Defence Forces and the funding for them. The value for money is a very unfortunate phrase, because what often value for money means when you strip away the varnish is a straightforward, simple cutback. And if you talk to the Reserve Defence Forces, and I'm sure you do, Minister, and I have certainly, not just in Donegal but elsewhere, asked them about their impression over the last number of years, they're very saddened, because the Reserve Defence Forces are that link of patriotism between our defence forces that we're immensely proud of, particularly for their peacekeeping role around the world, and our local communities. Particularly, 2 minutes remaining. Thank you very much, Chairperson. Particularly when you think of young people. I mean, I am a Donegal North East deputy, and I was told there not so long ago they did an open day in the local secondary school for the Reserve Defence Forces to look what interest would be there. But 100 people expressed an interest. But due to the restructuring, that's just not going to be practically possible for them, because the training facilities are now centralised down into big distances away from the likes of North and Inishowen.
Thank you.
And in many rural parts of Ireland, it now will not be practical for young people to participate in the Reserve Defence Forces and in their own way to be part of, giving patriotic duty, not just to the linked to the Defence Forces, but also remember the fundraising, the civic pride, the way they link into the local communities. I'm afraid the figures don't lie. I'll wrap up with this. I'm afraid, Minister, the figures here just don't lie, and I think we need to be honest about what's been happening in recent times.
Thank you. There's only a minute left, Minister.
Well, I can say to the Deputy, the reduction in the allocation to the Reserve over the period in question was addressed in the Value for Money report. The key variable in determining the level of training costs over the period 2006 to 2009, for example, was the uptake of both paid and unpaid training by members of the Reserve. As the uptake of training was on a voluntary basis, associated costs were demand-led. The costs incurred for paid training were less than those anticipated due to the lower uptake of paid training and less than anticipated strength levels. And the reality is that there was a strength designated level for the Reserve that was never achieved, and that far too few members of the Reserve were engaging in the recommended minimum 7-day training days. This is an issue addressed very substantially in the Value for Money report, which is why the reforms are being introduced. The money available, the cut in the number of PDF support staff accounts for the bulk of the savings now that are being affected following on from the value for money report.
Thank you.
And the money available for training activity by the reserve is being maintained in order to ensure sufficient paid training for a strength level of 4,000 personnel. So what I'm hoping we have as a result ultimately of the reforms is that we have 4,000 personnel who all participate in this minimum 7-day training days, that they benefit from doing that. And instead of us having a nominal strength, we have a real strength. Because in the most recent year, for which I have figures, and I'm giving you figures now, not from my notes but from memory, I think in the most recent year, at the end of 2011, there was only 2,500 members of the reserve who engaged in 7 full training days, yet gratuities were being paid to in the region of 5,000 members. So the real problem is that we have individuals involved in the reserve who take up the training days and who actually provide for the operational possibilities that the reserve is designed to provide for.
Thank you. Question 3. Actually, we've run out of time. It's very strict. Deputy, I said there's 4 minutes for
I have to contest,
questions.
Chairman, you have to be allowed time for supplementary and priorities. I've never seen priorities where there is. Yesterday,
there's 4 minutes in total.
Yesterday I sat, well then something wrong here. You're always allowed a short period for a believe me, I'll be very short in the supplementary I have to put, but you have to be allowed a time for a supplementary and priority.
There's a total of 6 minutes for each question.
Well then there's something. Yesterday I sat through, I had an oral question, very, very low down the list, and it wasn't taken because priorities took such a length of time. You know, so Minister, I'll come back to you with the questions later on. I'll leave it at that.
So, yeah, I've got to do my duty. I don't enjoy it.
Is attempting to give us a comprehensive answer. That comprehensive answer should not deprive us of the opportunity of a supplementary.
Deputy, just for the record, the last question, supplementary question, went into 3 minutes, and I warned that there were 2 minutes remaining for the reply. So please be reasonable, okay? Thank you. The third question.
On the 17th of January 2013, the Council of the European Union established the European Union Training Mission, EUTM Mali, which will provide military training and advice to the Malian armed forces to improve their military capacity and their effectiveness in guaranteeing the country's territorial integrity. Training will also be provided in international humanitarian law, the protection of civilians and human rights. It's envisaged that the training component of the mission will be made up of approximately 250 personnel, and this will be further supplemented by additional troops who will be deployed to provide force protection. Unlike the EU-led mission to the Republic of Chad and the Central African Republic, EUTM Mali, which is being launched in support of United Nations Security Council resolutions 2071 and 2085 of 2012, will not have any combat functions and is totally separate and distinct from any combat support being provided to the Malian armed forces by France and other countries. It will be conducted at the invitation of the Malian government and in close coordination with the United Nations, the African Union, the Economic Community of West African States and other key partners. The Council has tasked the mission commander with preparations for the early launch of the mission. To this end, force generation for the mission is currently ongoing at EU level. All Member States have been invited by the mission commander to provide contributions to the mission. Ireland is currently considering the provision of a small number of Defence Force personnel to the mission. Any participation by Ireland to this mission would most likely be limited to a small contribution of trainers and will be subject to government approval.
Thank you. Deputy Dail. I'll let you know when there's 2 minutes remaining for the entire question and supplementary answer.
I hope you haven't used up a few of those minutes now.
We're ahead of the posse. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Ciarán Comhairle. I think it would be a very serious mistake if we were to send troops in any form to Mali. At the time of the mission in Chad, at which the Irish troops were the second biggest, which again was really to further French interests, we were told that this was being done to protect internally displaced people and refugees from Darfur. But in reality, the EU troops were just used to free up and allow the dictator to crush the rebels while the rest of the EU were doing some other work for them. Look, at the issue in Mali is one really of where the Tuareg people have been in a long struggle for autonomy in northern Mali. The idea that the troops are going in to quell terrorism is a myth, in my opinion. All research would indicate that there was no record of Al-Qaeda activity in the area until it was orchestrated by the Algerian intelligence service, backed up by the United States, and with the full knowledge of the EU, who encouraged really fundamentalist atrocities, really to use that situation to enable an intervention, to open up and exploit that area for mineral wealth and oil. And is that not the real agenda? And would we not be making a serious mistake to try and further France's interests in that regard when we're talking about gold, uranium, diamonds, oil and so on, and not humanitarian issues whatsoever?
Thank you. It's 2.5 minutes, Minister, remaining.
I can only say to the Deputy she has a very extraordinary view of the world. Anyone who watched what happened in Mali, and particularly northern Mali, the context of the barbaric atrocities that were carried out on the local people there. People herded into stadiums with their arms chopped off. Women made cover their heads and threatened and not allowed to engage in what I describe as normal life, would recognise that there was a major problem in Mali. It's quite extraordinary that the Deputy should suggest that Al-Qaeda was engaged in Mali because it was encouraged by the United States to do so, and that the European Union encouraged atrocities. The Deputy has a very strange conspiratorial view of what's happening in the world. The reality is there were substantial difficulties in Mali. The Mali armed forces lack the capacity to deal with those difficulties. The Malian government has sought assistance. The United Nations, with whom the Deputy appears to disagree, has passed motions to provide for trainers to train the Malian forces, not only in dealing in an effective way with military matters, but it's by way of the comprehensive approach that's adopted to ensure that training is provided in international humanitarian law, and also with regard to ensuring the protection of civilians and human rights.
1 minute.
And Ireland has a very important role that we can play in this and contribute to it in a small way with a small number of troops, just as we have done with EU TM Somalia, in trying to bring about some degree of protection to people in Somalia and Mogadishu by ensuring that that government has trained appropriate forces available to it. And all I can say to the Deputy is that, as I said, the government is giving active consideration to deploying a small number of troops on this training mission.
Glad, Ciarán Comhairle, that my view of the world isn't the same as the Minister's, and I have to say my opinion isn't just my opinion. It would be the opinion of people like Jeremy Keenan, an acknowledged expert on the whole area of the Saharan people, and who has written many articles in relation to Algerian state terrorism and atrocities in northern Mali, articles such as how Washington helped to foster the Islamist uprising in Mali and so on. We know that atrocities have been carried out against civilians, but the idea that the French are there to protect civilians and that the real goal isn't an exploitation of mineral resources, quite frankly laughable, and I don't think we should have anything to do with it.
Okay, we have to move to the next question. I'm afraid, Minister, we've run out of time. Question 4.
I presume the Deputy regarded the chopping of people's arms off as an appropriate thing to continue happening, which would have happened without the French intervention.
Actually, Minister, sorry, excuse me.
In relation, now I am
Deputy, Deputy, I call for question 4.
I am of the view that the preparation for a new white paper on defence will benefit greatly from an informed and wide-ranging debate on Ireland's defence policy. To that end, I decided to initiate the preparation of a green paper on defence. When published, the green paper will initiate and inform a broad consultative process as part of the development of a new white paper. A draft green paper was submitted to me recently for my consideration. The approach taken is to assess the defence and security environment, and on this basis to pose questions to inform the debate on defence policy. I'll shortly be bringing a memorandum for Government to Cabinet seeking formal approval to publish the Green Paper and to initiate the consultation process to inform the development and completion of the White Paper on Defence. The views of members of the public and other interested parties on defence policy and defence provision will be welcomed during the consultative phase. The new White Paper on Defence is scheduled for completion in early 2014.
Thank you. Deputy Farrell.
Look, I better be very quick then, having regard to how clinical you are being on this whole matter of time. Minister, welcome the fact that you've embarked on the consultation process. Can you give us a sense of the timelines that are involved? How quickly will you start the consultation? How long will it last? Can I ask you, and this is something that has interested me since the government was formed, can I ask you, will the question of, will the Green Paper address the issue of the reality that a Minister for Justice also holds the defence portfolio? Can that be explored as an issue in the Green Paper and subsequently in the White Paper? Can you tell us, for example, is there any other democratic country where the person who is in control of the police force also is in control of the military? And maybe you might also indicate to us, are there any powers that the Minister for Defence would normally hold that you have been divested of by virtue of the fact that you are also Minister for Justice?
Thank you, Minister.
Now, let me deal with the last one first. I think I'm right in recollecting, and I don't want to mislead the House in this, that there are no powers that the Minister of Defence has that I've been relieved of as the Deputy, so nicely put it. Can I assure the Deputy that on the assumption that I do stay sane, I have no intention of posing any threat to the state by virtue that I am in the unusual position of being both Minister for Defence and Minister for Justice. But in the context of those two, of that matter, the two departments are of course entirely separate departments. But what is interesting in the context of the modern world is that there are interesting overlaps. If you're dealing, for example, with the issues of international terrorism and threats that may pose to this state, or the threat that those engaged in terrorism by locating here could pose to other states, there is an overlap in areas that would both be of concern for justice and defence. If you're dealing with the issues of for example, cyber security, there are overlaps in those areas, and I found it very beneficial in European Union level that I participate in both defence ministers and justice ministers meetings, because I've expressed the view that at European Union level there should be greater connectivity in dealing with some of these issues where there are clearly an overlap. The White Paper will deal comprehensively with defence issues. I don't think, and I suppose I'm right in assuming, the Deputy is suggesting that my having both these portfolios poses any risks to the defence of the state. It's a matter for the Taoiseach of the day to determine how to appropriately appoint ministers and what positions they should have.
2 minutes.
The defence, I think and I hope that all members of the House will find the Green Paper interesting, what it does, and I say I have to bring it before Cabinet before we publish it. It sets out defence issues where they are today, raises various questions in the context of today's world, and I hope will result in a very interesting conversation. The final, just to directly answer the Deputy's question, I would hope certainly by the time we get to if not by the end of this month, certainly early next month, depending on Cabinet pressures, that the paper will be published, that we'll get into the discussion process, and I look forward also to the Defence Committee, the Justice and Defence Committee, taking up the matter to engage in public discussion on the Green Paper.
Another supplementary. We still have a minute to go.
Very briefly, just on the matter, and I thank you for your response, but on the matter of your dual role, can you tell us, in terms of your role in Europe, are any of your European partners in the position that you are in, where they hold that dual role, or can you indicate to us any developed democracy where a similar situation prevails? I accept that you don't represent any threat to the security of the state. The Gardaí mightn't be terribly thrilled about what sort of a threat you represent to them and the forces it's developed. And I hope that the defence forces don't have cause in the future arising out of the pay claims to have any concerns. But, you know, the precedent appears to have been set in this country, or does it exist anywhere else?
Left.
My recollection, if I can say to the Deputy, and again, I don't want to mislead him, my recollection is that there is one of my ministerial colleagues in one of the smaller European Union states has both portfolios, but I don't want to, I will inform the Deputy in writing. I have two states in mind. I just want to be mistaken in that. In the context of the Defence Forces and the Gardaí, I did note with some interest that the Deputy's colleague, Deputy Collins, keeps on complaining that we recruited 600 new members to the Defence Forces during 2012. And it seems to be a regular cause of complaint on his part, suggesting that we should have recruited to the Gardaí and not the Defence Forces. But I think it's worth noting the Deputy O'Friel never complains about recruitment to the Defence Forces, but it might be a good idea the two deputies discuss that particular issue with each other, so they coordinated an approach that doesn't suggest that we should stop recruiting in the Defence Forces, and that there's a legitimate criticism of my occupying this particular office, that we did recruit so as to bring the numbers back up to the strength of 9,500 rather than allowing them go down into into the 8,000s as a consequence of Fianna Fáil failing to recruit in the years prior to my appointment.
Thank you, Minister. We lost a minute there. We'll have to move along. Question 5, please.
The Naval Service plays a vital role in the State's fight against drug smuggling as a member of the Joint Task Force on Drug Interdiction, together with the Revenue Commissioners and An Garda Síochána. While the Customs Service of the Revenue Commissioners has primary responsibility for the prevention of drug smuggling and responsibility for the prevention of crime rests primarily with An Garda Síochána, the White Paper on Defence in 2000 provides a security role for the Naval Service and Air Corps to assist these authorities in this important work. And if I might say, this is another area in which the two departments overlap. The Joint Task Force on Drug Interdiction was established in 1993 as a government measure to improve law enforcement in relation to drugs. It consists of members of An Garda Síochána, the Customs Service and the Naval Service. Naval Service maritime patrols and surveillance operations are carried out on a 24/7 basis with a commitment to having a minimum of 3 ships on patrol at all times. The last 10 years, the Naval Service was involved in 2 significant drug interdiction operations, one in 2007, Donnoch Bay, and one off the West Cork coast in 2008. These interagency operations resulted in the seizure of 3.2 tonnes of cocaine, which had an approximate street value of €1.2 billion. In addition, the Naval Service, as a member of the Joint Task Force, is committed to an international initiative, the Maritime Analysis and Operations Centre Narcotics. The centre, which was established in 2007, has led to a greater focus on intelligence exchange among countries to tackle large drug shipments by sea. It was set up by 7 European countries. It's designed as an international coordination force with access to national tasking agencies. Also, the acquisition of the 2 new offshore patrol vessels for the Naval Service to be delivered in 2014 and 2015 respectively, together with a continuous process of refurbishment on the other vessels. I presume I'm allowed 2 seconds here for the sneeze.
3.
Will ensure that the service can continue to carry out its drug interdiction and other roles in the challenging sea conditions off our coast.
Thank you. God bless you. Deputy McLaughlin.
Okay, Minister, thank you. Minister, as you may be aware, the Justice, Equality and Defence Committee here in the Oireachtas had the opportunity to visit Flag Officer Mark Mellett and his team down in Cork late last year, and I have to say I was mightily impressed with Flag Officer Mellett's vision for the Naval Services, the innovation that they've deployed and the partnership they've formed down there, with other academic institutions and so on. Really remarkable. The objective they've set themselves is to be world leaders. That's a high ambition, but when you see their operation down there and just the way that they have worked with like for example, they developed operations working with engineering companies, basically looking at machine gunnery, but not having to have the cost out at sea, working with computerised models within. It's just incredible to see the scale that they have, and also when you see the operation that they carry out and the way they go about it, they are really a service to be very proud of. So the question is meant that we need to give them all the resources that they deserve. They did raise the issue of operations, had great success a number of times in recent years, but what we're seeing in our streets is heroin and other drugs emerging, and the concern is that much of this comes by sea. So I suppose the question is to support what really is one of the most innovative and leading sectors that I've seen of our public services, and to give them whatever they need to do their job.
Little over 2 minutes remaining.
Well, I'm going to be extremely brief, just to say to Deputy McLaughlin that I agree with everything he said. I think they're an outstanding part of the Defence Forces. I think Mark Mellett is doing a fantastic job. I think their linkage with the private sector in seeking to participate in developments that would be of use to